Hello.
Around that time, I started receiving phone calls that made me uneasy. The caller wouldn't speak, but I could faintly hear a Denver radio station playing in the background. There were only 3 people who might call me from Denver and not say a word. My mother, Billy, and Linda. Since Mom didn't listen to the radio, that narrowed it down to Billy or Linda. I mentioned it to Mike, telling him one of them was likely behind the calls. He asked if I was certain, and I explained that I recognized the station's unique identification, even though I didn't listen to it regularly. One of them is calling, breathing into the phone, and then hanging up. I told him. Mike nodded and asked, "What are you planning to do about it?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe confront them. I have no idea how they even found me at work." "It could have been your mom," he suggested. "She knows your home number. She might have given it to them. Or they could have gotten it through caller ID." I sighed. "Well, it won't matter much soon. I'm leaving that job anyway. They're downsizing, and now they're talking about cutting hours to part-time to avoid paying benefits." Mike seemed surprised. "What are you going to do?" "I've already started looking for something else," I said. I told them if they want to treat me like a fast food worker, they might as well expect me to flip burgers elsewhere. At least then I'd know what I'm getting into. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you staying in Birmingham?" "For the most part," I replied. "But I've also applied for jobs in other places around the country." "Even Colorado?" he asked cautiously. I shook my head. "No, definitely not there. And not Miami either." He nodded, offering a sympathetic smile. "I hope you find something great nearby." A week later, the company finally announced the official cutbacks. My boss delivered the news with a shrug, saying it wasn't his decision. "I know," I replied, trying to keep calm. "I'll print out my resignation and start cleaning up my files." "You don't need to," he said hesitantly. "Just gather your things. I'll walk you out." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's policy," he explained awkwardly. "We can't risk anyone still accessing the computer systems after resigning. Disgruntled employees. You know?" I shrugged, but inside, I was fuming. I had been nothing but loyal and hardworking, yet here I was being treated like a potential threat. Silently, I packed my personal items, turned in my access card, and followed him out. It felt humiliating, especially as a few coworkers gave me pitying looks on the way out. Once outside, I loaded my single box of belongings into my car and drove home. I was early, and I knew Mary would have questions. She was on maternity leave and resting on the sofa when I walked in. "You're home early," she said, glancing up. "Are you feeling okay?" "I came down with a slight case of unemployment," I replied with a weak smile. Her face tightened. What happened?" I explained about the cutbacks and how I was escorted out. When I mentioned my resignation, I shrugged and reassured her that it was just company policy. That explanation calmed her slightly, but she was still upset at how I had been treated. "Honey, you should buy a lottery ticket," she said, her voice filled with sympathy. "If anyone deserves to win big, it's you." She hugged me, and I nodded silently. The past few years had felt like one long string of challenges, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was paying off some karmic debt. I excused myself to the bedroom before my emotions got the better of me. Once inside, I turned on some music, a habit I developed when I felt the need to cry. The ache of losing Sabrina still lingered, sharp and relentless, like a knife in my chest. Some days I could suppress it. Other days it overwhelmed me. I curled up on the bed, tears streaming down my face, and whispered a prayer to God. "Just let me go to her," I begged. The same desperate plea I had made to the nurses when I first woke up in a world without her. We had left Denver nearly a year ago, yet the pain hadn't dulled. It felt as raw as the moment her hand had stopped squeezing mine. By the end of the day, I managed to gather myself and refocus. Determined, I began sending out applications and letters to as many places as I could. I sent my resume to anyone I could think of, even to people who probably wouldn't bother reading my qualifications. I was so focused that I skipped lunch, ignored the door, and left the music playing until Mike knocked softly, letting me know dinner was ready. Guilt washed over me. Lately, I had been trying to take on most of the cooking to ease Mary's workload, especially with her pregnancy, but I had completely dropped the ball today. With the whole day free, I could have planned something special for us, but instead, I left it all to her. I didn't need to worry, though. Mary had called Mike and asked him to bring home dinner. One thing about living in the South is that there's never a shortage of amazing barbecue spots. As we sat down to eat, I apologized for failing to handle dinner. "You've done enough," Mike said. "Mary told me you had a rough day." I nodded, keeping quiet as we ate. My thoughts kept pulling me inward, leaving me unfit for conversation. Toward the end of the meal, Mary spoke up. "Peter, honey, we're worried about you. You've been through so much. Have you thought about talking to someone?" I shook my head. I saw someone after what happened with Linda, but all he did was help me get to a point where I wasn't going to kill them for it. "Maybe it's time to give it another try," she said gently. "Losing your job today is just another heavy blow." I shrugged. "I'll think about it," I conceded. "Once I found a new job and have coverage again, I'll see how I feel." Before the conversation could continue, the phone rang. Grateful for the distraction and hoping it was a job-related call, I answered. But all I heard was breathing on the other end. The stress of the day, losing my job, the grief, the constant strain, boiled over in an instant. My voice erupted as I yelled into the phone. "What do you want? Leave me alone. I'm already miserable." "Is that what you want? Do you want me to feel dead inside?" "Well, I do. Are you happy now?" I was yelling so loudly that I didn't realize I was both screaming and crying. Mary gently took the phone from my hand. "Hello?" she said firmly. "Whoever you are, please stop calling him. He's had to endure more pain than anyone should bear, and calling to torment him is cruel beyond measure. Whatever you think he's done to you, he's already suffering more than you can imagine. Leave him alone." She hung up and returned to me, where I had slid down against the wall. Mary and Mike helped me up and guided me to bed. They checked on me periodically through the evening, ensuring I was okay. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep plagued by the familiar dream. Sabrina and me, back in the car, at the light before it turned green. That was the last moment I had felt truly happy. I woke suddenly, the dream vanishing like smoke. It was 6 in the morning. Feeling restless, I dove into job applications, expanding my search even further. I considered how much savings I had and toyed with the idea of going back to college, maybe for a teaching degree or even a PhD. Dawn broke as I worked, and Mary and Mike started their day. Mike knocked softly before his shower. "I'm fine," I told him, lying. "Better than last night." That part was at least partially true, and it seemed enough for him. After he left, I decided to make breakfast. I started with Mike's, knowing he had to head out first. The smell of food would eventually lure Mary out of bed, giving me enough time to prepare something special for her. As Mike came out to pour his coffee, he saw the stack of pancakes I had just finished. "Thanks, little brother," he said. "Need help with anything?" "Nah, I've got it," I replied. "Might as well be useful with all this free time." Mike nodded and sat down to eat while I packed his lunch. Normally, Mary handled this, but today I needed to stay busy. As he watched, I mixed chocolate chips and raspberries into the pancake batter, then added generous amounts of curry and cayenne for Mary's craving-inspired breakfast. "You're going to eat that?" Mike asked, clearly surprised. "It's not for me," I replied with a small grin. "She'll love it." He chuckled, shaking his head, and finished his breakfast. "You going to be okay today?" he asked as he got ready to leave. "I'm working on the job hunt, so that'll keep me busy," I assured him. He sighed, looking like he wanted to say more, but time was short. He picked up his lunch and clapped me on the shoulder. Normally, I'd thank Mary for this with a belly rub, but I think you'd deck me if I tried. "Probably," I said with a small laugh. "See you tonight," he said as he walked out the door. Mary appeared a few minutes later, her hair sticking up in every direction. "Coffee," she demanded. "It's bad for the baby," I reminded her. "I'll make you some tea instead." Not today. I need coffee, she insisted, waddling over to pour herself half a cup. She diluted it with hot water before adding sugar and cream. That morning, Mary wandered over to check what I was cooking. The smell of the pancakes must have reached her because she practically drooled as she approached. "That smells heavenly," she said with obvious enthusiasm. "Good," I replied. "It's for you." I plated her stack of pancakes and set them on the table. She sat down and began eating with gusto. "This is exactly what I needed to start my day," she said with a satisfied groan. I smiled, poured myself a cup of coffee, and joined her at the table. "I'm sorry about last night," I said after a moment. "Those calls have been happening for a while now, and I just couldn't handle it anymore." Mary put her fork down briefly and nodded. "I know, honey. Mike filled me in last night. Do you really think it's Billy or Linda?" "It has to be someone in Denver," I said firmly. "It's not the lawyer, not Sabrina's parents, and definitely not Mom. They'd all talk to me. Dad might call, but only to tell me I'm a disappointment and should be over it by now. Billy and Linda are the only people left who could be doing this." "Why do you think they'd do something like that?" she asked, picking up her fork again. "To gloat, probably," I said bitterly. "They've already taken so much from me. Billy nearly killed me at that job site, and then he made me watch Sabrina die. Now the calls, like they're trying to keep me trapped in the past. Every time I try to move forward, they pull me back." I paused, my voice tightening. I should have killed them when I had the chance. If I had, maybe I'd be out on parole by now. Mary frowned, clearly upset at the thought of their actions being deliberate. "If I find out they're doing this just to hurt you," she said, her tone dark, "they'll have to answer to me. I'm not as forgiving as you are." I nodded, unable to think of anyone else who could be behind it. Mary let the conversation drop, but I could see in her expression that she was already plotting something. That afternoon, everything changed. Mary called out from the bathroom, her voice calm but urgent. "Honey, my water just broke. Grab my bag and call Mike. I'll clean up quickly, and then we can go." I sprang into action, gathering her things like a soldier following orders. When I called Mike, he assured me he'd meet us at the hospital. Mary stepped out of the bathroom, slipped on her shoes, and climbed into the car, calling her cousin along the way to spread the word. When we arrived, the hospital staff immediately whisked her to the maternity ward. She clung to my hand with an iron grip as the contractions grew stronger, each one testing my pain tolerance. By the time Mike arrived, my hand felt broken. He took my place, and I stepped out to the waiting room, where Mary's family began to gather. As more relatives trickled in, I updated them on Mary's progress. I was met with hugs from the women and firm handshakes from the men, though the latter made me wince after Mary's earlier grip. Family was sacred in the South, and they were quick to adopt Mike and me as their own, especially since they knew about our strained relationship with our parents. Just after midnight, Mike emerged from the delivery room, his eyes glistening with tears. "She's okay," he announced, his voice trembling with emotion. "What did she have?" someone asked eagerly. "A boy or a girl?" "One of each," Mike replied with a broad smile. "She had twins." He came over and hugged me tightly. "You need to come see them," he said. "Everyone will get a chance. But you first." I nodded and let him lead me into the room. Mary was sitting up, her hospital gown adjusted to nurse the babies, who were peacefully feeding. She looked radiant despite her exhaustion. "Congratulations, Mommy," I whispered with a teary smile. She returned the smile and spoke softly. "Peter, I'd like you to meet your nephew, Peter Elliott Hamilton," she said, nodding toward the baby nursing on her right side. "You named him after me?" I asked, overwhelmed. She nodded. "We were planning to name him after my grandfather, but when we found out we were having twins, we decided this instead." Mike added gently, "And this little one," he said, nodding toward the baby nursing on her left side, "is your niece, Sabrina Abigail Hamilton." "Sabrina?" I whispered, my voice breaking. It was as though she would always be with us now, a part of our family forever. Overwhelmed by gratitude and grief, I hugged Mike tightly and let my tears flow. When I finally turned to Mary, I hugged her awkwardly before gently touching the babies' heads. I was promised my turn to hold them in the morning, but for now, it was time for the rest of the family to meet the newest additions. Stepping outside, I sat on a bench and breathed in the cool night air, feeling calmer. I pulled out my phone and made a call. "Hello," Mrs. Pierce answered, her voice tentative. "Hi, Mrs. Pierce," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's Peter. I'm sorry to call so late, but I have some news I wanted to share." "Peter," she said warmly, "how are you? You sound upset. Is everything okay?" "I'm managing," I replied. "I miss her every day, just like you do, but that's why I'm calling. Remember my brother Mike and his fiancée Mary? They were at the service with me." "Yes, of course," she said. "They're married now, right?" "They are," I confirmed. "And tonight Mary gave birth. She had a boy and a girl. They named the twins after me and Sabrina." "They what?" she asked, her voice filled with surprise. "Can you say that again?" "They named their daughter Sabrina Abigail," I told her softly. "They loved Sabrina too." On the other end of the line, Mrs. Pierce began to weep. I could hear her repeating what I'd said for her husband. And soon, all three of us were crying together. Over the past year, I had kept in touch with them, but this was the first truly joyful news any of us had shared. I promised to send them pictures as soon as I could take some. When they asked if Mike or Mary would mind if they came down to meet the twins, I reassured them, "I'll ask, but I think they'd be disappointed if you didn't." We spoke a little longer before saying goodnight. When I went back inside, Mike was still entertaining family, so I chatted with a few relatives until visiting hours were called to an end. Once the hospital staff encouraged everyone to leave so Mary could rest, Mike and I headed home. I already had one crib set up in my room, but Mike surprised me by revealing they had a second one ready. Without hesitation, I started assembling it, happy to have something constructive to do. As I worked, tears streamed down my face, though I smiled when I glanced up at Mike. "Thank you for this," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't even begin to explain how much it means to me." "I know," he said gently. "We both do. This past year's been hard on you, and we've seen it. But she's been with us in spirit all along." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I called her parents to tell them about the twins." "How did they take the news?" he asked. "They were touched," I replied. "Knowing that she's now a part of our family meant a lot to them. They want to come visit and meet the babies." Mike nodded, his voice soft but firm. "Tell them they're more than welcome. We'd like them to meet Sabrina, too." We finished putting the second crib together, and Mike glanced at me. "Are you sure you're okay with having them in your room?" "Positive," I said. "I want to help out as much as I can, especially while Mary's recovering." Mike nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You still planning to stick around Birmingham?" "I'd like to," I said honestly, "but I'm not getting any bites on jobs here. I could probably move to Alaska tomorrow and find work, but that's too far." He sighed. "I hope you find something closer." Over the following weeks, the twins became the center of attention. Family members and friends came and went, showering them with love. Mike and Mary had to explain the significance of the name change to many people, and every retelling brought a fresh wave of sympathy. Sabrina's parents flew down for a few days and doted on the twins like proud grandparents. Mike and Mary welcomed them with open arms, telling them they were more than welcome to fill the role of grandparents if they wanted. The gesture cemented their place in the family. I took over nighttime duty with the twins, keeping them in my room so Mary could get as much rest as possible. It was during one of these nights that I had the dream again. It started as always. The light turned green, and the headlights rushed toward us. But this time, the dream shifted. I was suddenly standing in my room, the twins sleeping peacefully in their cribs. And there she was. Sabrina stood between the cribs, looking down at the babies. Each twin had one of her fingers wrapped tightly in their tiny fists. "They're beautiful," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder at me with a smile that broke my heart all over again. "I miss you so much," I whispered, stepping toward her, my voice trembling. She looked at me with sadness in her eyes as she gently pulled her fingers free and turned to face me. I know. I see you cry, and I'm so sorry I can't be there with you. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm sorry. I wanted to go with you. I still do. Every day. I just want to be with you. She reached out as if to comfort me. You can't, she said gently. You still have so much to do. My time with you was incredible, and I love you. But now you have to live. Be happy. Build a life. The only life I wanted was with you, I said, my voice breaking. That's not true, she said with a soft laugh, the sound cutting through me and stirring memories of our shared joy. You wanted other lives before you met me. Pick one. Live it. Make it amazing. I shook my head. The only other life I wanted was Linda. And you know how that ended. You'll meet someone new, she said confidently. And when you do, I'll be cheering for you. I have to go now. I just wanted to see the little ones and let you know I'm okay. Come see me when you're in Denver next, and we'll talk more. Don't go, I begged. I don't want to lose you again. You're not losing me, she promised with a serene smile. I'll always be here, watching over your shoulder. I tried to hold onto the dream, to keep her there a moment longer, but the harder I clung, the faster it faded. When I woke, I stared at the cribs where she had stood and wept silently. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. It was Mary's soft voice that brought me back to the present. It's just me, she said soothingly when I startled awake. I groaned and sank back into my pillow. What time is it? I asked, my body feeling drained and heavy. Early, she replied. Mike should be getting up for work soon. Go back to sleep. I can handle breakfast today. No, I'm okay, I said, trying to sit up. Like hell you are, she countered, her voice firm but kind. I know you dreamed about her last night. How do you know that? I asked, embarrassment creeping in. The baby monitor, she admitted. You were talking in your sleep. Sounded bad. I didn't wake Mike, but I heard you crying for a long time afterward. I dreamed she came to see the kids, I said quietly, unable to meet her gaze. And to say goodbye, she added softly, her tone gentle and understanding. She told me to live, I said, my voice trembling. To stop wanting to be with her. Tears began to spill down my cheeks. The first time I'd broken down in front of Mary in a long while. She gently placed Petey back in his crib and came to sit beside me. Wrapping her arm around my shoulder, she started to cry along with me, sharing in my grief. When we both calmed down, she spoke softly. I think that's good advice. It's been a year since she was taken from us. What happened was horrible, and it's even worse because you had to witness it. But you can't stop living, Pete. Mike and I want you to find someone, to build a life again. She gave me a small smile and continued. I know you want to stay here for the kids, but we've got this. Take one of the jobs you've been considering. Go out on your own. Meet someone. Meet a few someones even. Let Mike live vicariously through you for a change. After all, you've had to endure enough of our late-night antics to scar you for life. Let him get a taste of single life from your adventures instead. I shrugged, wiping at my face. I can't just turn it off, I admitted. If I could, I would have flipped the switch on Linda before I left the house that day. She nodded knowingly. I'm not saying it has to happen overnight, but remember how you got over Linda? It was gradual. First, you could talk about her without getting upset. Then you stopped talking about her altogether because it didn't matter anymore. You'll get there. I nodded again, though doubt lingered. I guess I have to believe that. Believe it or not, she said, kissing my cheek before getting up to check on Sabrina. I think that dream was a good thing. How so? I asked, tilting my head. Well, there are two possibilities, she said. Either Sabrina's spirit really did reach out to you, telling you it's time to look toward the future, or it's your subconscious letting you know you're ready to move on. Either way, it's good. If it's Sabrina, then she's probably the only person who could convince you to let go. And if it's your mind, it means you're healing on your own. Both mean you're ready to stop living in that terrible moment. I nodded slowly, deciding I preferred the idea that it was Sabrina herself. At that moment, Mike's voice drifted down the hall, signaling he was awake. The topic was left behind as I changed PY while Mary got Sabrina ready for the day. When Mike appeared in the doorway, I handed him his son so he could say hello. He took PY but gave me a searching look. "Baby monitor," he said simply, explaining that he had overheard everything. "Oh," I said, feeling embarrassment creep back in. "It's okay," he reassured me. "I agree with Mary. It's time for you to make a future for yourself. Petey and Sabrina are going to need cousins someday, after all." I shrugged, realizing that everyone seemed to want the same thing for me. The thought of hearing the same advice from Sabrina's parents or my old counselor didn't seem far off. "I'll work on it," I promised quietly. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my job search with renewed focus. Eventually, I found a promising opportunity in Austin, a company building high-tech homes. They needed a computer specialist to handle everything from installing cabling in Phase 1 to integrating smart systems in Phase 2 and preparing in-house automation in Phase 3. After saying my goodbyes to Mike, Mary, and our little angels, I hit the road in a brand new Silverado, purchased specifically for the job. The work turned out to be enjoyable, and I quickly found my rhythm. The development was being built in 3 stages with 100 homes in each, and I replaced a technician who had left to work for an oil company in Dallas. My boss, Dave, was relieved to have someone with experience on a job site, and we soon had Stage 1 ready for market. That was a year ago. Today, for the first time in years, I heard the voice of Sabrina's killer. When I got home, I parked my truck in the driveway and headed to my small apartment above Mrs. Sanchez's garage. She was a widow in her 40s who rented out the space to help pay bills. The apartment had once been her husband's man cave, and she had converted it into a cozy living space. Over time, we had developed a mutually beneficial arrangement. She looked after my place when I traveled, and I provided tech support and a sense of security for her. Knocking on her door, I was greeted by her warm smile. "Mrs. Sanchez," I asked, "has anyone called here looking for me in the last few days?" She nodded. "Your brother called this morning. He said it was urgent, so I gave him the number for your work. I hope that's okay." I stiffened but reassured her. "Not really, but don't feel bad. I actually have 2 brothers, and the one who called isn't welcome in my life. He knows that. He tricked you into giving him my number. Don't worry. It's happened to me before, too." Her face fell. "I'm sorry. Was he the only one who's been trying to find you?" "No," I said, sighing. "My sister arrived about an hour ago." As Mrs. Sanchez spoke, her expression grew alarmed, clearly worried she might have made a mistake. I nodded slowly, already piecing the situation together. I knew Mary hadn't been to Austin. The kids were far too young for such a trip. "Thank you, Mrs. Sanchez," I said, my voice steady. "Did she mention when she'd be back?" "She didn't," Mrs. Sanchez replied. "She wanted to know if she could wait in your apartment, so I let her in. That's her car parked out on the street. Should I ask her to leave?" "No," I said. "I'll handle it. But in the future, if someone comes looking for me, please call me before giving out any numbers or letting them in." I hesitated before continuing. "The brother who called earlier, he killed someone I loved in a car crash. There's no forgiveness for him, and hearing from him brings back things I'd rather not revisit." Her face softened with regret. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Tell me how I can fix this." I took a deep breath. "I may need you to come with me when I go see who's in my apartment. It's not my sister. She's in Alabama with her kids. I don't want to have this conversation alone, not without a witness." Mrs. Sanchez nodded and slipped on her shoes while I stepped outside to check the car. The Colorado plates confirmed what I'd already suspected. I sighed heavily, the small hope that it might be someone I'd want to see vanishing. Together, we climbed the stairs to my apartment. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside, bracing myself for the confrontation. Sitting there, as if she had every right to be, was Linda, my least favorite person in the world. "You drove a long way," I said, walking past her to grab a beer. I didn't plan to get drunk, but I needed something to steady my nerves for the conversation ahead. I know what you're thinking, Linda said hesitantly, and I can't blame you for it. I snorted, taking a long pull from the bottle. Lady, you have no idea what I'm thinking. I set the beer down and looked at her. You know, I was actually considering packing up my truck and driving off into the sunset. At least no one ever contacted me in Los Angeles. I could do tech work for an adult film company, hook up with some of the talent, and spend my free time on the beach. Linda flinched but didn't respond. It's pathetic, I continued, that you're the last person I've been with. Sabrina and I were supposed to spend that night together, but Billy made sure to put an end to my sex life. Again. If I were you, she said carefully, I'd probably be thinking about hitting me right now. That's tempting, I admitted, glancing at Mrs. Sanchez, who gratefully accepted the beer I handed her. But if I started, I'd have trouble stopping. Hitting you would probably be addictive. Linda paled but nodded. What were you thinking then? She asked. I was thinking about leaving, I said flatly. The one place I was free of you and Billy was Birmingham, but you tracked me down there. Those calls. They were from you, weren't they? She winced. It wasn't meant to hurt you, she said quietly. That's funny, I replied dryly. I remember you saying something similar about your choices in life once before. Enough with the guessing games. Why are you here? And why is Billy calling me at work? Her eyes widened. He called you? She asked, genuinely surprised. I didn't think he could find you. Well, you must have left a clue, I said sharply. He tricked Mrs. Sanchez into giving him my work number, just like you talked her into letting you into my apartment. Linda looked down, guilt written all over her face. I'm sorry, she murmured. Funny how you're always sorry, I said, exasperated. But you never stop making things worse. I sighed heavily, trying to rein in my frustration. All right, you clearly came down here for a reason. It's a long way to come just to say hello. She hesitated, glancing uncomfortably at Mrs. Sanchez. Well, Linda began. First off, I wanted to tell you how sorry I am about Sabrina. Mary showed US pictures of the two of you. I was so glad to see you happy again. When the accident happened, we had no idea it was you in the other car. When I heard she died and that you were with her, her voice broke slightly. My heart broke for you. I was so hopeful she'd make you happy. And then, in an instant, it was all taken away. I took another swig of my beer, my voice flat as I responded. Thank you for your sympathies. There was no sarcasm in my tone, but my words carried the weight of lingering nightmares. That was the worst day of my life. Linda gave me an anguished look. I know you don't believe me, she said softly, but I mean it. I do believe you, I said quietly. I'm not being sarcastic. It's just that I relive that night in my dreams far too often. I paused, letting the words sink in. You know she was awake before the end, right? Her eyes widened in horror as she shook her head. She apologized to me, I said, my voice cracking. She told me she loved me, and that she was sorry she wouldn't be around to say it again. She told me she was scared, but her last thoughts were regret, that she had to leave me alone. Linda stared at me, her face crumpling as the weight of my words hit her. I looked away, my hands trembling as I gripped the beer bottle, the memories cutting deep as they always did. I had reached a point where I could talk about Sabrina without breaking down, though the pain from that night still lingered in my heart. I didn't think it would ever fully go away. I didn't know, Linda whispered, looking down. Yeah, no reason you should, I replied. After the accident, Mike had enough of Billy tearing me apart. First, Billy almost killed me at work, and then he killed Sabrina. That was it, we got out. But you wouldn't stop following me. I don't even know how you tracked me down. But the calls, the ones where you just breathed into the phone, were making it worse. She nodded, her expression remorseful. I was calling to try to tell you how sorry I was about Sabrina, she admitted. But every time I heard your voice, I panicked. What could I say to make it better? I froze up every time. After you yelled at me and Mary took the phone, I realized I couldn't do it by phone anymore. So, you drove all the way here to tell me you're sorry about Sabrina? I asked, sure there had to be more to it. Not just that, she said hesitantly, looking away. Billy and I are married now. And I'm pregnant. I wanted to talk to you about the baby. If it's a girl, I was thinking of naming her Sabrina. If you're okay with that. I shook my head. Mike and Mary already named their daughter Sabrina, I said firmly. They had a baby? She asked, her eyes widening. They had twins, I corrected her. A girl named Sabrina and a boy named Peter. They loved Sabrina too. Everyone who knew her did. Linda looked crestfallen. It was clear this had been her last attempt to reach out to me, and it had fallen flat. That must have made you happy, she said softly. It made Sabrina's parents happy too, I said. They visited at least 3 times since the twins were born. Linda nodded slowly. Your mother would probably like the chance to see them, she suggested cautiously. That's not my decision, I told her. I never asked Mike to cut her off. For that matter, I never asked them to cut you and Billy off either. Mike decided that what happened that night was too much for him to overlook. She nodded again, her expression heavy with guilt. Your mom said the accident made the 3 of you decide to move away, she murmured. I tracked you down through a friend of mine who works in online security. She figured out you were in Birmingham, and from there, it wasn't hard to find your work and home numbers. I shrugged. Took you a little longer to find me here. Yeah, she admitted. You didn't get the apartment in your name. She had to track you down through your truck, which took more time. Guess so, I said, sighing. So, you wanted to tell me you were sorry about Sabrina? Ask my blessing for the name? Anything else? Can we just catch up for a little while? She asked tentatively. I thought about it for a long moment before nodding. All right, I said. Turning to Mrs. Sanchez, I added, thanks for making sure everything was okay. I think we'll be fine now. She nodded, finishing her beer. I should start dinner anyway. Will you two be joining us? Not tonight, I said carefully. I think we'll order delivery. Could you send them back our way if they come to the door? Sure, she said, disappearing down the stairs. As soon as she left, I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app, setting it to save directly to the cloud. Linda, I said evenly, I'm going to record the rest of this conversation now that Mrs. Sanchez is gone. I admit there's almost no chance you came here to cause trouble, but you're married to Billy, and he could easily think I'd do something just to get back at him. I need to protect myself. You understand? Yes, she said quickly. I think that's probably a good idea. I would never cheat on Billy, but he might think I came here intending to apologize to you physically. I nodded and plugged the phone in to ensure it wouldn't die during our talk. We agreed on pizza, and I used my house phone to order it. Once the call was made, I settled into my usual chair while she stayed on the sofa. For starters, I said, I don't really go by Pete anymore. Most people call me Ham now, short for Hamilton. Is that because of Mike's kids? She asked curiously. Maybe a little, I admitted, but mostly because there are 3 guys named Peter on the crew I work with. You're back in construction? She asked. Sort of, I said. I install household automation systems in new builds. I handle the cabling, set up the networks, and test the systems. That sounds interesting, she said, trying to sound upbeat. The technology is amazing, but the work itself is pretty routine, I replied. What about you? Did you finish college? I did, she said, perking up slightly. I'm a CPA now and working for a firm in Denver. That's routine, I said with a small smile. What I do is exciting compared to that. She laughed lightly. Billy tried computers like you, she admitted, but he didn't have the aptitude for it. He's working with your dad now. I shrugged, suppressing the urge to gloat over Billy's failure. Not everyone's cut out for classrooms, I said casually. She nodded, then hesitated. We don't spend much time with my parents anymore, she admitted quietly. They blame Billy? I asked. She nodded. They were never thrilled about him, even before the accident. When you came around that Christmas, my mom figured out we hadn't told you yet. She said it was cruel to keep you in the dark, no matter what I felt. I nodded in agreement but refrained from commenting further. Do they know I was in the other car when the accident happened? I asked her if your parents know I was in the other car, I said, and Linda nodded slowly. They know, she admitted quietly, but I don't think they believe it was an accident. Neither do I said bluntly. Maybe I could if he hadn't nearly killed me at work before, but he was there, Linda. He's reckless, and it's not hard to see how it could happen. She frowned skeptically. Was it really that bad? In response, I stood up and lifted my shirt to show her the scar on my back. A few inches to the left, and I'd be in a wheelchair. A couple of inches deeper, and it would have punctured my kidney. I would have bled out before they could have freed me. She winced but shook her head. He didn't mean to hurt you, she insisted. After the airbags deployed, he was hysterical. He went to check on the other car and came back in tears. He recognized you immediately. You were screaming for her to wake up. I could hear you from inside the truck. I nodded, my voice dry. The worst night of my life, courtesy of the same man responsible for the second worst night. She flinched, her face tightening with guilt. I know, she whispered. I came here hoping I could offer you something, anything, that might bring you some peace. I nodded again, staring into my drink. When I woke up in the hospital, I didn't remember at first. Then it hit me all over again and I lost it. They had to sedate me. The first thing I said when I came to was begging them to let me go to her. Linda's face crumpled. Mary made me promise I wouldn't do anything to make it happen, I continued quietly. She knew all I wanted was to lay down in the ground next to Sabrina and let them bury us together. She forced me to promise, though, and I did. So instead, I prayed every day, for over a year, for something to send me to her. I paused, my voice faltering. For months, I saw your brother's headlights coming toward us every night in my dreams. She looked horrified but nodded as if she finally understood the depth of the damage. Emotional more than physical. How did you get over it? She asked softly. I didn't, I said simply. I think about it less, I pray for it less, and I have the nightmare less often. But I still wake up sometimes and feel disappointed that I'm here and not with her. That must be awful, she said, her voice heavy with sympathy. I shrugged. My life's been awful ever since the day you kissed Billy in front of me. Every time I recover from one blow, another one lands. And just when I start to get my footing, fate, or Billy's talent for chaos brings the two of you back into my life to ruin everything all over again. If I were further along in my recovery, I might think today was one of those days. After all, Billy called me at work, and here you are. Linda's head snapped up, shaking in denial. I swear, I didn't come here to cause trouble, she said quickly. Relax, I said with a bitter laugh. There's nothing left for you to destroy. There's no one in my life. My job is fine as long as Billy stops calling the office. All the furniture belongs to the apartment. I don't have much else to lose. She looked deeply troubled. What can I do to help? She asked, her tone serious. Mostly stay away, I said flatly. If I see Billy again, I'll kill him. No hesitation. No second thoughts. I'll always see Sabrina's death as murder, whether he meant it or not. He ran a red light and hit us so hard they couldn't even make her presentable for her funeral. Linda's face paled as I continued. Part of me hopes he does show up. Texas practices capital punishment. It would put both of us out of our misery. But you're pregnant. Your child will need a father. Billy will have to do, so keep him away from me. If I ever come back to Denver, I'll only be visiting two places, her grave and her parents' house. What about your mother? She asked tentatively. No, I said curtly. I said goodbye to her the last time I saw her. There's nothing more to say. She sends letters to Mike's house, thinking I'm there. Mike forwards them and I send replies. She doesn't know I'm in Texas, and I'd rather keep it that way. I think she'd worry if she knew Mike wasn't around to look after me anymore. I don't want to take that small comfort from her. Linda nodded solemnly. She still has your graduation photos on the wall and talks about you whenever she can. She's proud of you for finishing college, but she's frantic about how you're doing. She came to see me in the hospital, I said, nodding. Mary told me she and my mom were there, but I was unconscious. I wouldn't have been in any state to hear apologies anyway. I wanted to go, Linda admitted, her voice trembling, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to tell you how sorry I was. It's okay, I said lightly. I wouldn't have been able to hear it then. After a pause, I asked, what about you? Are you still in touch with anyone from high school? Or are most of your friends from college now? College, mostly, she said. Most of the high school crowd scattered after graduation. A few stayed around, but I don't really keep in touch. Did you lose any friends because of Billy? I asked, genuinely curious. A couple, she admitted. Some people didn't like how much I changed when we started dating. Most got over it, but there were one or two who couldn't approve. That's about what I'd expect, I said, nodding as I got up to answer the door. I paid for the pizza, then returned to the living room. We sat on the sofa, eating with the box on the coffee table between us. I had switched to soda after my beer and poured her one as well. I think that catches us up on everything, I said, settling back into my seat. I told her as we ate. Well, we bought a house, Linda said, her face lighting up with excitement. That's one big thing. We're renovating it with help from your dad. It's not huge and we got it cheap because of all the issues, but it's ours. Congratulations, I said, offering a small smile. I'm glad you've got a place to raise your kids. She nodded, clearly thrilled at the idea of owning a home. I've got some pictures on my phone, she said, pulling it out and scrolling through her gallery before passing it over to me. The house was modestly sized, but I could see the work it needed. Peeling paint, outdated fixtures, and a rough yard. Still, it had potential. I swiped through the photos until I reached the last one, then handed the phone back to her. Nice, I said honestly. I can see what you're working with. Once you two are done, I'm sure it'll look like $1 million. I can hardly wait, she gushed. What about you? Have you thought about settling down anywhere? I used to, but not for a while, I admitted. Sabrina and I had planned on settling in Miami, but I wasn't about to bring that up now. You should, she said. There's nothing like having your own place. It's kind of amazing. I nodded. Maybe someday, if I get a long-term job or meet someone, I'd think about putting down roots. Until then, renting from Mrs. Sanchez suits my needs. This job isn't permanent? She asked, surprised. No, I said. We're finishing up the last stage of construction. Once I've set up the computer systems in the remaining homes and tested everything, it'll be done. Probably sometime in August. What will you do after that? She asked. I'll head back to Birmingham for a bit to see the kids and look for a new job. After that, I'll go wherever the work is, at least until I find something in my field that feels right. I could ask my friend if she knows of any opportunities, she offered. She still has a lot of connections. I shook my head. That's okay. I'm not in a rush. If I need to pay the bills, I can work with Mike for a while. She gave me a determined look. Let me help, she pleaded. It doesn't have to mean anything. I'll just ask if she knows anyone who's hiring. I shrugged. Fine. Tell her to email me if she hears of anything. What's your email? She asked, pulling out her phone. I arched an eyebrow. You had this woman track me halfway across the country, find my home and work numbers, and hack into DMV records to trace my truck. And now she can't find my email? I'm surprised she's not already reading my messages before I get them. Linda chuckled at that. She wasn't looking for your online presence. Just clues to your location. But I'll tell her to email you. You know, she added thoughtfully, the two of you would probably hit it off if you didn't know she was friends with me. Maybe, I said, shrugging, but I still have nightmares. It's not easy to look to the future when you're stuck living in one horrible moment. Give her a chance, Linda said gently. If you talk to her, you might at least become friends. I shrugged again. If she starts a conversation, I won't be rude. But don't push it. It took me 4 years to move on from what happened between you and me before I found Sabrina. I don't see it happening again soon, or easily. If it's all right with you, Linda said cautiously, I'd like to explain what happened to her. Eve tends to put her foot in her mouth as skillfully as Billy, and I seem to make life harder for you. Linda, I said with a sigh. There's also the complication that she's your friend. Look, you and I have had a pleasant chat today. No yelling, no fighting, no drama. That's the best outcome you could have hoped for when you came here. You probably expected me to lose my temper or throw you out. She nodded. I did, she admitted. You don't know how grateful I am that you were willing to sit down and talk to me. I meant it when I said I liked you. It's been hard knowing you hated me. I know I earned it, but I always hoped we could be friends again someday. Sabrina probably could have brought us together, I said quietly. If she'd told me she wanted me to talk to you and Billy, she could have convinced me. Would you like me to tell him that? Linda asked hesitantly. It might hurt him to know she had that kind of influence. I shook my head, grabbing another slice of pizza. Don't tell him on my account, but if you want to use it to punish him, be my guest. You're the one who has to live with him. She considered this, then nodded. You're right. It's probably best he doesn't know. I'll save it for the next time he really pisses me off. I chuckled at that, and she smiled faintly, though her expression turned serious after the laughter faded. So now what? Linda asked, breaking the silence. I think we've talked about everything on the table. Where do we go from here? You should probably call your husband, I suggested. I have a feeling he called me at work to see if I'd heard from you. Knowing him, he's just foolish enough to drive down here after you. Stop him before that idea gets stuck in his head. Linda nodded and picked up her phone. Hi, honey, she said when he answered. I couldn't hear his side of the conversation, but based on her responses, I could guess the general direction it was taking. I told you I was going to try to talk to Pete, she reminded him patiently. Yes, Eve helped me track him down. And yes, I know you called him at work earlier. She paused, listening before continuing. He's here now. We've been talking about things. No, that's not a good idea. Her voice grew sharper. Why not? What sort of response did he give you when you called him at work? A pause, then an exasperated, he hung up on you, and you think he wants to talk to you now? He'd probably hang up again. Though this time he might crush the phone in his hand, since your throat isn't here for him to squeeze. I snorted at that, amused despite myself. Yes, she continued. He still hates you. He hates me too. But at least he's willing to talk to me because I wasn't driving the truck that night. Maybe it's not fair, but that's how he feels. There was another pause before Linda sighed heavily. No, he hasn't hurt me, Bill. For starters, he knows I'm pregnant, and no matter how much he hates us, he's not the kind of guy to hurt a woman. No, he doesn't want us to name the baby Sabrina. Mike already named his daughter that. Her voice softened as she added, Yeah, Mary had twins, a boy and a girl. They named the boy Peter and the girl Sabrina so they'd always be together in some way. Thoughtful, isn't it? I leaned back, quietly amused at the thought of Billy's reaction to hearing about the twins. No, Bill, Linda said firmly, her tone shifting. It's not a good idea to come here. Pete thinks of Sabrina's death as murder. I know it was an accident, but from his perspective, every time something bad happens, you're in the middle of it, calling it an accident. You can see why he might be suspicious, right? I'm not saying you did it on purpose, but it's hard for him to believe otherwise at this point. Her voice hardened again. No, I'm not running you down, Bill. I'm just telling you the truth. He's hated your guts for 6 years, and nothing has changed. From what I've seen, you could wait 6 more, and he still wouldn't forgive you. She paused, then added sharply, Do you really want to complain about fairness? I wasn't going to tell you this, but Pete said Sabrina was awake after the accident. She told him she loved him before she died. Right there, in his arms. If the roles had been reversed, if you were in his place and we were in the car, do you think you could have gotten over it? Linda's voice grew colder as she listened to his response. Oh, you could you? She thundered indignantly. Bill, I can't even talk to you right now. If you come down here, Pete is going to beat you to death like a rabid dog. And you know what? He's not even concerned about getting caught. He's already said lethal injection would get him back to Sabrina, and that's what he wants. I raised an eyebrow at that, curious about Billy's reaction. Did you really just say that? Linda snapped. You know what, Bill? I told Pete I'd never cheat on you, and I won't. But after that crack, I'm really tempted to spend the night here and tell you it doesn't count because I told you I was doing it. With that, she hung up the phone and let out a low shriek of frustration, tossing it back into her purse. Some days, I really want to hit your brother, she muttered. He's not my brother, I reminded her. I disowned him a long time ago. Do I even want to know what he said at the end that earned him the hang-up? She shook her head. You already hate him enough as it is, she said. Well, if it's that bad, I suggest a rubber mallet to the kneecaps, I said dryly. I'll let you know if I decide to try it, she replied with a faint smile. You know he'll show up here in the morning, right? I told him not to come, she said irritably. You also told him you were considering spending the night here to pay him back for his witless comment, I pointed out. It might have been an empty threat, but you delivered it to an empty head. She rolled her eyes and picked up her phone again. Bill, stop what you're doing, she said, her tone sharp. Do not, under any circumstances, come down here. Pete will seriously kill you if you show up. Go get drunk or watch football. Anything that keeps you there. There was a pause as she listened. Then she added, Yes, I know what I said earlier. I also remember what you said, and you're pushing your luck. Let me spell it out for you. Pete told me that if Sabrina had asked him to, he might have buried the hatchet with you. But she's gone, and no one else has that power. The person who could have healed things with your brother died on the end of your truck. Do you still want to drive down here and see how that works out for you? She didn't wait for his response. Go have dinner with your parents, then head to that bar you like. Yes, that one. Stay out of trouble and stay far away from here. She hung up again with a frustrated sigh, her hand clenching her phone tightly. That seemed to end the conversation, Linda said, hanging up her phone. He's afraid of snakes? I asked, a touch of humor in my voice. She chuckled. Not quite. All I had to do was tell him to go hang out at a strip bar. And he's perfectly happy to leave me here with you. Always a class act, I said dryly. I won't pry, but it sounds like you've sent him to the strippers before. She nodded, a little sheepishly. Bill has a problem with saying things he shouldn't. After I finish yelling at him, I usually throw him out so I can cool off. I'm well aware of his mouth, I replied. The summer he worked with me, he spent most of his time bragging about stealing you away from a total chicken. She rolled her eyes. Something else I need to yell at him about, she muttered. That one should probably be way down on the list of reasons to put him in the doghouse, I pointed out. True, she admitted, and we lapsed into silence for a while. Eventually, she broke the quiet. Can I call you sometimes? She asked hesitantly. Just to talk. I shrugged. If it's important to you, I suppose, though I don't have much to say these days. Hopefully that'll change, she said with a small smile. We talked some more, the conversation drifting between college memories and my current life in Austin. At times, it was surprisingly easy to chat with her, almost as if the past hadn't happened. At other times, the weight of history between us made things tense. When the clock on the cable box read late, I asked, Do you have a place to stay? She looked sheepish. Your landlady offered me a room for the night. My stuff's already in the house. I hope that's not a problem. I shook my head. No, it's fine. I thought I might stay a day and see the area, she admitted, looking hopeful. It's Friday night, so I don't have work tomorrow, I said. But I don't explore much myself. I know the good places to eat and shop, but that's about it. I'll ask Mrs. Sanchez to suggest a few spots, she promised. I should probably explain myself to her anyway. I nodded. She'll definitely have some questions. And she's not one to be shy about asking. I walked her out and turned off the phone recording. For a brief moment, I considered packing my truck and leaving in the middle of the night, but I knew I wouldn't. Instead, I picked up the phone and called home, Birmingham, where Mike, Mary, and the kids were. Hey, little brother, Mike greeted. Calling late, aren't you? What's up? Hi, Mike, I said, the first genuine smile of the day tugging at my lips. It's been kind of a weird day, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it. Sounds ominous, he said, laughing. Let me get Mary, she's just checking on the monsters. Oh, by the way, Sabrina said her first swear word today. Mommy suspects she knows who she learned it from. So if I disappear, you'll know I've been buried in the woods somewhere. I couldn't help but laugh. You've got to be careful what you say around them now. He pulled the phone away and spoke to Mary, then returned. I'm putting you on speaker so she can hear what kind of potty mouth you've turned her daughter into, he teased. There was a beep as the speaker activated, and I heard Sabrina happily babbling what sounded suspiciously like a certain four-letter word. Mike was screwed if they didn't fix that soon. Not funny, Peter, Mary snapped, though I could hear her trying not to laugh. Sorry, I said, forcing myself to calm down. I've had a rough day, so I needed the laugh. See, Mike, Mary said sharply. Grown men can watch their language when they try. Yes, dear, he replied meekly. I swear I didn't teach it to her. Maybe she's just babbling sounds, and we're reacting too much. Shut up, Mike, she said, turning her attention back to me. So, what happened that made your day so bad? I got a phone call at work, I said carefully. You mean like the ones you were getting here? She asked, her tone instantly concerned. No, I replied. This one was from Billy. Her voice hardened. What did that want? At the mention of his name, Mary's voice sharpened. How did he find you? I hung up as soon as I heard his voice, I told her. How he tracked me down is as much a mystery to me as it is to you. When I left work, I only gave the number to my landlady, and only for emergencies. So what happened? Mike asked. I guess he went to Mrs. Sanchez, claimed he was my brother, and made her think it was urgent. She gave him the number. You have no idea what he wanted? Nope, I said. I figured it out once Mrs. Sanchez told me my sister was waiting for me in my apartment. Sister? Mike demanded, incredulous. What the? He caught himself before finishing the thought, likely mindful of Mary's sharp ears. Linda, I said flatly. Mary blurted out a shocked, What? I might have laughed if I didn't have so much to tell them. Yeah, she drove down here to talk to me. And Billy, good old Leadfoot, was calling to see if I'd heard from her. What did she want? Mary asked, her tone already bordering on anger. She wanted to offload a lot of guilt, express how sorry she was about Sabrina, and then told me she was pregnant. She wanted to know how I'd feel if she named her daughter Sabrina. What? Mary thundered. Relax, I said soothingly. I told her it was too late. You'd already named the twins after me and Sabrina. She was surprised you had kids. Didn't you tell the mother creature? We did, Mike confirmed. I guess she didn't pass that information along. So she just showed up unannounced and dropped that bomb on you? I nodded and told them everything about the phone calls in Birmingham, her friend tracking me down here, and her calls to Billy. What are you going to do? Mary asked. She asked me to take her around town tomorrow and show her the sights. Then I'll send her home and forget about her. She said she'd call from time to time, but I don't imagine that'll keep up for long. This is the most interesting thing that's happened to me in 6 months. It's not like I have much to say, and I remember her reason for leaving me was that conversations with me weren't all that fulfilling. She'll get bored, and the calls will taper off. They sympathized with me and wished they could be there. It's okay, I said softly. I think the job here is just about done. Once it is, I'll be back for a little while to rest up and spend time with the kids and you guys. You're always welcome, Mike said. We're actually planning on buying a house this summer. With you and the Pierces visiting more often, we need more space. God help us when we have to put the kids in separate rooms. Wow, I said, my mood dimming. Any idea when you're planning to move? We're talking to the bank now to figure out what we can afford. Then we'll start looking, Mary said. They sounded excited, but I felt left behind. We ended the call, and I couldn't shake the sense of emptiness. I poured myself a shot of tequila, trying to make sense of it. When they'd moved, I hadn't felt like this. But now, as they prepared to put down roots, I felt adrift. Sabrina and I would have started our life together by now. She'd have her master's, same as me. We'd both be working, building a home and a future. Instead, I sat alone on the floor of a garage apartment, drinking and crying for a life that would never be. I wept, daydreaming about a wedding that never happened, a family we never had, and a future we'd never share. It was the middle of the night when I felt a hand on mine. Startled, I looked up. She was there. Sabrina. She was beautiful and perfect, just as I remembered her. I broke into fresh sobs. "I'm so sorry," I choked out. "I can't remember. I try so hard to remember your voice, but it's all so dim now. I don't want to forget." "Peter," she whispered, her voice soft and sympathetic. She sat down beside me, wrapping an arm around me. Felt so real that I cried harder. "You don't have to remember," she said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "Peter, Peter, Peter," she said gently. "What am I going to do with you? We can't keep meeting like this." She handed me a tissue. Her touch, her presence. It felt so real. But as the dream faded, I woke up alone, tears still fresh on my cheeks. The pain of her absence was a wound that might never fully heal. But for that moment, in the quiet of the night, it felt as though she had been with me again, giving me the strength to keep going. I didn't want to, but I wiped the tears from my eyes and worked on steadying my breath. Slowly, I inhaled deeply a few times and turned my attention back to her. "I'm sorry," I said again. She gave me a knowing look and finished my unspoken thought. "I know you've apologized, but you're still clinging to the past." She sighed softly before continuing. "I told you to move on, Pete, but that means truly moving forward. You can't keep sitting here hoping life will change without doing something about it." Her words hit hard, but I stayed silent as she pressed on. "There's an entire world out there, full of people who would love to meet someone like you. Somewhere out there, there's a girl staring at the stars right now, dreaming of the day she meets the guy she's meant to spend her life with." She grinned and added, "Or maybe she's just staring at her ceiling and, entertaining herself while fantasizing about him." She gave me a playful punch on the shoulder, trying to draw a smile out of me. "The point is, she's not going to find you while you're stuck here with me." I nodded miserably. Everyone seemed to want the same thing for me, to find someone new and move on. I took another deep breath. "I'll try," I promised weakly. "Not good enough," she said, her tone firm. "You need to commit, not just try. Persevere. I love you, but I can't keep showing up like this. No more late-night visits. No more tequila binges. No more reliving the crash over and over. You're 25, Pete. You're still young enough to have the life you want, but you need to stop wanting to die to get there." "But how?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There's a hole in my chest, and it's never going to go away." "Then fill it," she replied, her gaze steady. "Pete, we were together for a year, but you've been mourning me for 2. What happened to that wisdom of yours? Didn't you once say recovery should only take half the length of the relationship?" Couldn't help but smile a little. "That was just a theory," I argued half-heartedly. "Well, it's time to put it into practice," she said firmly. "Let Linda set you up with her friend, or start paying attention to the people around here. Heck, Mrs. Sanchez could probably use a strong man around the house. You could play the hero for a bit. It'd be good for both of you." That made me laugh, even if it was just a small chuckle. "I guess I do have a thing for older women now," I said, teasing her. After all, her birthday was a month before mine, and I used to joke about her being my first older woman. She smirked. "Well, if that's your type, isn't there a nursing home on your way to work? You could find a nice lady there to pull down those polyester slacks for you." "Stop!" I laughed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it felt genuine. She grinned and capped the tequila bottle. "If it takes something like that to snap you out of this funk, I'm all for it. But I mean it, this is the last time I'm visiting like this. The next time I come back, I want to hear all about her. I want to know she makes you happy. I can't be the one to make you happy anymore, Pete. All I can do now is hurt you. Her serene smile softened the blow of her words. "Don't worry about me," she said with a wink. "I've got a book to read." She smirked and gave my shoulder another playful punch before picking up the tequila bottle. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "If Linda had broken up with you when she first started things with Billy, this might have been how things ended with her, too. What should I do about her?" I asked, genuinely unsure. She shrugged. "I think she really means it when she says she's sorry. You've held onto that grudge for a long time. Maybe it's time to let it go. You don't have to be her friend, but you've already made some progress by forgiving her." She paused, then added, "Your brother's going to be tougher. You still blame him for what happened to me, don't you?" I nodded. "I do. You'll have to let that go, too," she said gently. "Deep down, you know it was an accident. If it had been someone else, Mike, or even a total stranger, you'd have moved on by now. Billy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know that." I didn't respond immediately, but the anger in my expression softened slightly. She smiled. "You'll be okay, Pete. Just bring me good news next time, and we'll talk more. Until then..." She lifted the tequila bottle with a grin. "I'll hang on to this. I love you," she said before disappearing down the stairs. The dream faded, shifting into a series of random, nonsensical images, fragments of places we'd visited and memories from my childhood. There were no nightmares about the crash this time, just a jumble of Denver, Los Angeles, Birmingham, Austin, and beyond. I woke up early, stiff and hungover, the hard floor having done me no favors. My head throbbed, and I wasn't in the best shape to start the day. Knowing Linda would be banging on the door soon to drag me out for the promised tour, I decided to clean up. Grabbing the glass I had been drinking from, I looked around for the tequila bottle. For the life of me, I couldn't find it. It wasn't on the table or the floor. I moved the sofa, checked under the cushions, and even searched the kitchen, thinking I might have put it away in a drunken haze. But it was simply gone. The thought crossed my mind that Sabrina had taken it with her, but I shook my head, dismissing the idea. There had to be an explanation. I'd probably come across it in the next few days. Starting the morning as one would after a night of tequila, I made a quick stop at the bathroom to throw up. Feeling marginally better, I took a shower, shaved, and brewed some coffee. I wanted nothing more than to crawl back into bed, but I knew Linda wouldn't let me. My suspicions were confirmed when she showed up just as I was mixing batter for the waffle maker. "You okay?" she asked, taking one look at my face. "Yeah," I replied, my voice rough. "Rough night." "I'm sorry," she said, clearly feeling guilty. "My visit probably set it off. I heard some things last night. My window was open." I frowned at her. "Yeah, Mary mentioned I talk in my sleep. Apparently, Sabrina visits me during those times." "Does that happen often?" she asked, curious. "Mostly, I just dream about the accident," I admitted. "But there have been a couple of times she's come to talk. The first time was after the twins were born. Last night was the second." Linda nodded, though I could see she wanted to press for more details. She knew her place in my life was still precarious and didn't want to push too hard. "I'm sorry for causing that," she said softly. "It's not your fault," I assured her as I placed a waffle in front of her. "We needed to talk anyway. She had something important to tell me. I didn't know if you'd started with cravings yet, so it's just plain," I added. "Thanks," she said gratefully, watching as I poured batter for the next waffle. "Can I ask what she said?" I chuckled. "Mostly that she's tired of my nonsense." My tone was light, but I felt a shift in myself, like the relief that comes after an infected tooth is pulled. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming. For the first time, I felt like I might actually be healing. She told me to stop living in that moment and find someone to build a life with. She tried to tell me the same thing the first time she visited, but I wasn't ready to listen. "I think that's good advice," Linda said carefully, treading lightly. "Do you think you're ready now?" I considered it and nodded. She pointed out that we were together for 1 year, and I've been mourning her for 2. She also told me she believes you when you say you're sorry about everything. If we'd broken up when you and Billy started seeing each other, we probably would have been good friends. She said I've held onto this grudge long enough. Linda gasped softly. Really? She asked, her voice a mix of surprise and hope. I nodded and slid the second waffle onto her plate, starting on a third. She doesn't know if we could salvage a friendship, but she thought it was time I let go of the anger. I'd like us to at least be able to talk, I admitted. We'll see about being friends. Billy's always going to be a sore spot. What did she say about Billy? Linda asked, cautiously intrigued. She said I'd have forgiven anyone else in the world by now, I replied. She admitted she'd been distracted that night too. Normally, she would have checked the intersection before moving, even if the light was green. But she was focused on me, just like Billy was focused on you. So, she pushed you toward reconciling with him? Linda asked, sounding surprised. She gave me enough to think about, I admitted as I joined her at the table with my waffle. It's not going to happen overnight, but maybe someday. Mary says it could just be my subconscious trying to process everything, I added. But I like to think Sabrina really does visit from time to time. It's comforting. Linda nodded thoughtfully. I never really believed in that sort of thing, she admitted. But the change in you this morning is pretty compelling. You didn't come in to check on me last night, did you? I asked, thinking of the missing tequila bottle. No, she assured me. I figured barging into your apartment in the middle of the night would be a terrible idea, even if it was just to see if you were okay. I shrugged. Nothing important. Just noticed something out of place this morning and couldn't remember moving it. She shook her head. I heard you talking for a while, then it got quiet. No one came to the door. I would have heard them. I nodded and smiled to myself. It was proof enough for me that Sabrina had been there, but I wasn't ready to share that. Not yet. After breakfast, I showed Linda around town, including a trip to the job site. She was impressed with the automation in the showroom home we toured, and I felt a glimmer of hope for better days ahead. I wish I could convince you to come back to Denver, Linda said wistfully as we toured the automated home. This would be perfect for our house, especially now while we're renovating. I shrugged. The equipment isn't cheap, I admitted. Some features seem useful, like turning lights on remotely when you're away, but others? I'm not sure I'd ever use them. Honestly, who wants to fiddle with home automation while trying to relax on vacation? We chatted about the features we liked before heading to a barbecue place for lunch. Linda's appetite was in full force. She devoured an impressive portion of ribs and capped it off with a hefty slice of chocolate cake. Watching her eat that much made me queasy, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Afterward, we visited an open-air swap meet. It was a little bit of everything: decorations, collectibles, odds and ends. Linda picked up some accents for her home, but nothing stood out to me. I browsed through motorcycle parts for a while but realized I didn't know enough about bikes to attempt building one. Without anyone local to guide me, I let the idea go. We ended the day at Mrs. Sanchez's house for dinner. She seemed relieved to see Linda and me getting along and asked if things were okay. Mrs. Sanchez had always been kind to me, so even if our interactions had turned into a battleground, I wouldn't have held it against her. Thankfully, it hadn't come to that. The next morning, Linda left early. She hugged me goodbye and promised to stay in touch, but added with a laugh, "I'll call, but not too often. I don't want to turn into a pest. And I'll let your mom know you're doing okay." You're right. She worries. I watched her drive away, waving as she went. Afterward, I spent time talking to Mrs. Sanchez, assuring her I was fine and catching her up on recent events. Later, I called Mike to let him know Linda's visit had been uneventful overall. I mentioned that I had some news to share, but I'd rather discuss it in person. Mike sounded uneasy, probably imagining the worst, but I wasn't ready to talk about Sabrina's visit over the phone. When Monday rolled around, I returned to work. Dave nodded at me as I unloaded my truck, a silent acknowledgement that I seemed better. He didn't pry, and I appreciated that. Life settled into a new rhythm, but I made an effort to go out regularly. Each night of the week, I picked a different activity. On Mondays, I explored parks, walking and getting familiar with the area. Sometimes I'd bring a book and read on a bench, making it a regular ritual. Tuesdays, I went to a lively coffeehouse known for its cultural events, poetry readings, live music, improv performances. Wednesdays were movie nights at the mall multiplex. Thursdays, I joined some coworkers for beers and, occasionally, trips to the strip club. Admittedly, I wasn't likely to find the future Mrs. Hamilton there, but at least I was reacquainting myself with the idea of women. Fridays, I hit the nightclubs, hoping to meet someone over drinks and a dance. Saturdays, I kept open, often revisiting places from earlier in the week. Though I didn't meet anyone special right away, I stayed true to Sabrina's advice and persevered. Mrs. Sanchez noticed the change in me. One Wednesday night, we sat down and she brought it up. I had shared a lot about my past with her after Linda's visit, including the details of Sabrina's accident and how she died. When I mentioned the dreams where Sabrina visited me, Mrs. Sanchez nodded knowingly. My grandmother was from old Mexico and deeply superstitious, she said. She believed that guidance from the spirits of the departed should be respected. She'd want to hear every detail of your visions. I'm not my grandmother, she continued, but I can tell you what I know. Start from the beginning. I hesitated but eventually opened up, recounting the accident and how I often dreamed of that night. I explained how the dream had shifted, with Sabrina standing over the twins and urging me to move on and find someone else. I shared my struggles with Linda and Billy, including the injury at work caused by Billy, and finally, I described Sabrina's most recent visit. It felt a little awkward repeating what Sabrina had said about Mrs. Sanchez, but since she'd asked for as much detail as I could remember, I included it all. Mrs. Sanchez listened intently, her expression a mix of curiosity and understanding. I've searched the apartment at least 4 times since then, I told her, frustration clear in my voice. I moved all the furniture, even checked the toilet tank, but there's no sign of the bottle. Mrs. Sanchez crossed herself, her eyes narrowing with intrigue. I've never heard of a spirit taking objects from the living, she said thoughtfully. It sounds like Sabrina is acting as a guardian angel. Sometimes the spirits of loved ones watch over us. She tactfully avoided mentioning Sabrina's pointed advice about her, but the implications hung in the air between us. It sounds like she's desperate for you to truly live your life, she continued. I think it would deeply sadden her to see you continue like this. You should take her words to heart. I do, I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips as I remembered Sabrina's reaction when I told her the same. I've been getting out a lot more, trying to participate in life as much as I can. She reached out and patted my hand. I've noticed, she said warmly. You've been out and about so much lately. It's a struggle to catch you before you're out the door. There was a time I could barely convince you to come down for dinner. I looked down, slightly embarrassed. Sorry about that. Thursdays are really the only night I have solid dinner plans. The rest of the week, I can be here if you'd like, I offered. She scoffed lightly and smiled. You don't need to change anything for me. I'm just glad to see you waking up. From everything you've told me, your life has been one long nightmare. I hope this means you're finally ready to leave it behind. Me too, I said, my smile growing just a bit wider. We began having dinner together more regularly after that. Sometimes she cooked, sometimes I did, and other times we'd go out. On Fridays, I'd take her dancing, and on Wednesdays, she'd join me for a movie. Occasionally, she'd come with me to other spots I frequented. She even visited the coffeehouse with me once and loved it. In turn, she introduced me to a few places she enjoyed, broadening my horizons and connecting me with new people. Despite our growing closeness, we never crossed any lines. Ours was a bond built on companionship and understanding. One evening over dinner, I confided in her about my job. I don't think it's going to last much longer, I admitted. She nodded knowingly. That's just how construction work goes, she said. My brother's been through the same thing more times than I can count. As summer dragged on, the faces on the crew began to change. People left as better offers came along, thinning our numbers. The work stretched out a little longer for those of us who remained, but it was clear the end was near. By the last day, there were only 6 of us left. The once bustling site, full of power tools and truck engines, had grown eerily quiet. Dave, our supervisor, was moving on to a new contract in Georgia and taking 3 of the guys with him. "Sorry I couldn't take you with us, man," Dave said apologetically. "The work we're doing is general contracting. Nothing I could justify your salary for." We finished the last touches on the project by lunchtime but hung around to enjoy the day since we were still getting paid. Dave handed out our final paychecks along with some generous bonuses and even surprised us with a couple of flats of beer. We gathered around, sitting on tailgates or the office steps, and swapped stories while we drank. When the conversation turned to future plans, I told them, "My brother lives in Birmingham. He just bought a house, so I'm going to stay with him for a while and help him fix it up. After that, I think it's time I put my degree to use instead of my hands." That earned a round of laughter. I'd earned their respect as the guy with a degree who didn't act too good for manual labor. "I'm surprised you haven't invented an app and started making millions," one of them joked. I thought about it for a moment and nodded. "I suppose I could come up with something for construction sites," I said, and the guys jumped in with suggestions. We talked about super durable phones for job sites and tools that synced with them. I already had a laser thermometer for mine, which I used constantly, for checking door handles, meat temperatures, even the heat on the driveway before deciding whether to put on shoes to get the paper. It was an everyday essential. The conversation shifted to software ideas, blueprint management systems, inventory tracking, and more. Some ideas were brilliant, others downright absurd. Inspired, I decided to start working on a construction app in my spare time, promising to share any progress with the crew. The beers kept flowing, and inevitably, the conversation veered toward women. Bragging ensued, laughter echoed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt part of something good. The first couple of times the conversation turned to me, I conveniently found reasons to be elsewhere, grabbing another beer or excusing myself for a quick trip to the bathroom. But my luck didn't hold out forever. "What about you, Ham?" Dave asked. "No stories about the ones that got away?" I shook my head. "Not really. I've only had 2 women in my life. The first one is married to my brother now. Took me a long time to get over that." "And the second?" he asked. I hesitated, then answered quietly, "Car crash. Same brother was driving the other car. What are the odds, right?" "No," Dave muttered, shaking his head. "That's rough." "Yeah," I said. "She died 2 years ago. I'm just starting to think about dating again. Family reunions are just me and my other brother now." "Man, that's tough," one of the guys said, the group falling into an uncomfortable silence. Not wanting to leave things on such a somber note, I decided to lighten the mood. I told them about the last time Sabrina came to visit me and how the next morning, the tequila bottle had vanished. I described scouring my locked apartment, moving every piece of furniture, even checking the toilet tank, only to find no trace of it. The story worked as intended. The guys looked a little creeped out, but I knew they'd be retelling it the next time they needed a good ghost story. Despite the heat, each of them shivered as they imagined the scene. I grinned, hoping Sabrina was watching. She always loved a good story. "Man, that gave me the heebie-jeebies," Larry said, crumpling his beer can. He had been one of the first hires and stuck it out to the end with the rest of us. Glancing at the sun, he added, "I think I'm going to head out. It's almost quitting time anyway." He stood, shaking hands all around. "It's been a pleasure working with you all. I'll see some of you in Montana and the rest I hope to cross paths with again." We said our goodbyes as he climbed into his truck and drove off. A couple of other guys followed suit, leaving just me and Dave. "Go on home, Ham," Dave said, his tone light. "I've just got to lock up, and then the job's done." "Yeah," I said, looking around. "It feels strange to see the site this quiet, doesn't it?" "Yeah," he agreed. "We've been making a racket for months now." He gestured to the remaining half-case of beer. "Take it with you." "You don't want it?" I asked, surprised. "Nah," he replied. "I'm flying out to Georgia in the morning. Got everything packed already." I nodded and followed him into the office to grab the beer. As I loaded it into my truck, Dave appeared with a large box, sliding it into the bed. "What's this?" I asked. Just a little something to help with your brother's house, he said, putting a finger to his lips. Curious, I opened the flap and found equipment for home automation, everything I'd need to install a similar setup to the one we'd worked on. He added a few more boxes and a spool of cable. You sure this is kosher? I asked, half joking. Don't care, he said with a shrug. Already wrote it off as used. No one else here can use it, so it might as well go to you. Thanks, Dave, I said, shaking his hand again. Thanks for your hard work, he replied. I emailed you a recommendation from the company and one from me personally. You can probably count on Larry for one too. Just to keep you from putting a curse on him with your voodoo powers. I chuckled. You don't believe me about the bottle? Not saying I don't, he said with a smirk. But if there's an explanation, I'd like to know it too. We said our goodbyes, and I packed the boxes securely before heading home. Once there, I unloaded the boxes and put the beer in the fridge. Hard liquor was a thing of the past for me. I'd given the rest of my collection to Mrs. Sanchez after that fateful night. After a shower and a change of clothes, I went downstairs for dinner and let her know the job was officially done. She nodded and smiled sadly. I'm going to miss you, Ham, she said. If I were younger or you were older, I'd have taken Sabrina's advice and played horsey with you. I laughed and hugged her. I'll miss you too, and I don't think you're too old to play horsey. She laughed, gently caressing my cheek. Find your beloved, she said, her voice soft but firm. You did your best to find her here, but it wasn't meant to be. You'll find her, though. I know you will. I will, I promised, squeezing her tight. Keep a bed ready for me in case I pass this way again. Always, she replied, her smile warm. Maybe even mine, if I'm not too old to play horsey. We laughed as we made dinner together, enjoying the moment. I hadn't set a firm date yet, but Mike knew I'd be arriving soon. After dinner, I usually went out clubbing, but tonight I decided to call Mike instead to let him know what was going on. We talked casually, and I promised to keep in touch through email and phone as much as possible. Over the past few months, since Linda's visit, Mrs. Sanchez and I had become very good friends, and it felt bittersweet knowing I'd soon be leaving. After the call, I went upstairs to start packing. Most of the household items, dishes, pots, pans, and furniture were hers, so my task was fairly simple. The only things I needed to sort were my clothes, personal belongings, and bathroom essentials. I decided to leave the waffle iron behind since it was inexpensive and could easily be replaced. I called Mike again to let him know I'd be taking one last week to say my goodbyes before hitting the road. It was a 2-day drive, so I wasn't in a rush. I mentioned having some automation gear I could install in their house if they wanted it. Mike was skeptical, but Mary overruled him, and I found myself committed to spending the rest of the summer crawling around their house installing new systems. The week went by quickly. I said goodbye to a few acquaintances at my usual hangouts, including the ladies at the strip club, who seemed genuinely disappointed. They appreciated that I was a decent tipper and respected boundaries. Part of that was from seeing a guy get arrested for crossing the line, and part of it was just not being that kind of man. On my last night in Austin, Mrs. Sanchez and I went dancing, as we did most Fridays. She had taught me how to dance over the months, transforming me from a hopeless case into someone passable on the dance floor. I wished I could repay her for all she'd done. She always seemed to enjoy our nights out but kept things strictly platonic, ensuring we ended the night with a hug at her door. This night, however, felt different. She drank more than usual and was noticeably more affectionate. I figured it was because it was our last night out together and let her enjoy herself. By the time we closed the bar, she was completely drunk. I helped her to her car and into the passenger seat, doing my best to preserve her dignity as her skirt hiked up when I lifted her in. After ensuring she was belted in, I drove her home. Once we arrived, I realized she couldn't make it to her door alone. Fishing her keys from her purse, I unlocked the door and helped her inside. She was barely conscious as I guided her upstairs and into bed. I intended to leave her there, but I couldn't just walk away. I removed her shoes and searched for one of her nightshirts, which I usually saw hanging on the back of the door. After changing her into it as respectfully as possible, I tucked her in. She mumbled occasionally, letting me know she wasn't entirely asleep. I brought her a bucket in case she got sick and was about to leave when she opened her eyes. "Don't go," she said softly, reaching out for my hand. She looked beautiful even in her drunken state, and I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been tempted to make a move in the past. But I had no desire for a drunken hookup. I kissed her hand gently. "I don't think either of us is in any shape to keep the night going," I said, keeping my tone light. "No," she murmured. "Just stay with me. It's been so long since I've had someone's arms around me." I hesitated but figured it was harmless. Stripping down to my boxers, I slid into bed behind her. We fell asleep quickly, the comfort of another person's presence lulling us both. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of her retching into the bucket. I sat up, holding her hair back as she emptied her stomach. Once she was done, I took the bucket to the bathroom, cleaned it out, and brought her a glass of water and a washcloth. She mumbled her thanks before drifting back to sleep. I returned the bucket and settled back into bed. The next time I woke, it was morning. The bed beside me was empty, and the smell of breakfast wafted into the room. Stretching, I was about to get up when she walked in, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Don't get up," she said with a smile. "It's your last day, so I'm making you breakfast in bed." She looked surprisingly fresh, none the worse for wear after the previous night. "It's almost ready," she added. "I'll be back in a few minutes." I sipped the coffee as I woke up, savoring the peaceful start to the day. A few minutes later, she returned with a tray loaded with steak, eggs, toast, hash browns, and juice. She placed the tray on my lap and slid back into bed beside me. "You've got a long drive today," she reminded me. "You need a good breakfast before hitting the road." Leaning in, she kissed my cheek and added, "Thanks for taking care of me last night." There was a hint of embarrassment in her voice. "I don't normally go that crazy." "It's okay," I reassured her. "I was glad I could be there for you. Honestly, I had the feeling you were going a little harder because I'm leaving." She nodded, her expression softening. "I'm going to miss you," she admitted, taking a piece of toast from the tray and nibbling on it. "Louis and I never had kids. But if we had, I'd like to think they'd have turned out like you." Her words touched me deeply. I'd shed so many tears in the past, but the mist in my eyes this time wasn't from pain, sorrow, or loss. I carefully set the tray aside and wrapped her in a hug. "When everything happened with my brother," I said quietly, "I sort of lost my mother too. My father was never much of one to begin with, but I've missed having someone like that in my life." She hugged me back just as tightly. The last time I'd hugged my mother, I felt nothing, no warmth, no love. Yet here, lying in the bed of a woman I'd have been proud to call my lover if things had been just a little different, I found the affection I'd been longing for. After a few minutes, she pulled back and kissed my cheek. "Eat up," she said with a smile. "You don't want it to get cold." She ate most of the toast, her tender stomach unable to handle much more, while I polished off the rest of the meal. We shared the orange juice, and as I ate, I realized how far I'd come. My life was finally starting to mend. I wasn't obsessing over Sabrina anymore, and I'd found a motherly figure in Rosa who meant more to me than my own mother ever had. I had also taken steps toward forgiving Linda and Billy, though I still wasn't sure I could ever see Billy without wanting him dead. When breakfast was done, I gave Rosa a longer, lingering hug. "I would have been happy for you to teach me how to please a woman again," I whispered. She laughed and nipped my ear lightly. "I'd have ruined you for anyone else," she teased. Then, her voice softened. "Don't forget to call me often. I'll miss you terribly." "You need to find a new dance partner," I told her, trying to keep the mood light. "I don't want you sitting at home all the time." She laughed. "So, now you're my guardian angel? It's time we both started living again," she said passionately. "I want you to find someone," I replied earnestly. "Maybe even have a last-minute little one of your own." She smiled, patting my cheek. "Being a mother is something I missed out on," she said with a small shrug. "Maybe God was telling me the son I was meant to have had already arrived." I hugged her tighter, holding on as if letting go meant losing something precious. "You'd better believe it," I said. "You're stuck with me now." "Good," she said with a smile. "And when you meet your special lady, I want to be invited to the wedding." "You'd better be there," I promised, kissing her gently on the lips. "I love you, Rosa," I said tearfully. "I love you too, Peter," she replied. She'd always called me Ham, but this morning felt different, special. She shooed me off to shower, change, and finish packing while she tidied the house. Some students were moving in soon, so I knew she wouldn't be alone. She mentioned only accepting female tenants this year, claiming they were less trouble. That decision gave me peace of mind, knowing she'd be safe. After showering, I cleaned up the bathroom, started the washer for the towels, and got dressed. I double-checked the house for anything I might have missed. Though I knew Rosa would take care of anything I left behind, I wanted the place ready for her to move someone in right away. I put the towels in the dryer and took the last of my bags to the truck. Returning the keys, I told her, "I left the dryer running with the last towels I used." "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I was planning to strip the bed and wash the sheets later today anyway." "Crap, I meant to do that too," I said, berating myself. "Sorry to leave it with you. Oh, and I left my waffle iron in the kitchen. Don't send it. I left it on purpose." She nodded with a smile. "Okay," she said, kissing my cheek and wiping away the lipstick, just like a mother would. "Get on the road and call me when you get there, so I don't worry." I smiled and hugged her one last time. "We should have had this talk months ago," I said. "Yeah," she admitted. "But we'll have plenty of time to catch up later." Finally, I had to leave. She had Mike and Mary's new address and phone number, and I knew she'd be fine. As I got on the road, I immediately wished I wasn't leaving. Turning on the radio, I tried to distract myself from saying goodbye to a woman who had become so important to me. Eventually, the sadness faded, and I found myself looking forward to seeing the kids again, and their parents to a slightly lesser extent. I made it to Jackson, Mississippi, that evening and called Rosa to let her know I'd arrived safely. Afterward, I called Mike to give him the same update. "You're practically next door," Mike said. "You couldn't drive another 3 hours?" "I could've," I chuckled. "But I'm taking my time. The drive's been pretty smooth. I'll leave early tomorrow and be there by lunchtime." "All right," he said. "We'll have your room ready when you get here, and after lunch, I'll put you to work." "So much for a vacation," I joked. "I've been waiting for you to get here before tackling the drywall," he admitted. "The house is a disaster zone right now, but I've already done a lot of the work." "Does Mary have a place for the kids while we work? Sheetrock dust isn't exactly great for them." "Of course," he replied, sounding almost offended. "We're still renting the old apartment until we can move into the house, hopefully by the end of the month, with some help." "Gotcha," I said, laughing. "Slave labor reporting for duty." "Now you're catching on," he quipped. We hung up, and after a moment's hesitation, I called Linda. She knew I'd finished my job in Austin but didn't realize I was already on the road. We talked for about 20 minutes, catching up. I didn't mention how close I'd gotten to Rosa recently but did say things had been going well. After the call, I watched a movie on my laptop before turning in early. I was up and back on the road before sunrise. Sunglasses were essential, as the morning sun seemed determined to drill a laser beam directly into the back of my skull. When I arrived in Birmingham, I stopped at Mike and Mary's apartment to drop off my things. They were surprised to see me so early and greeted me with tight hugs before letting the kids have their turn. I called Rosa to let her know I'd made it safely, and she insisted I keep updating her. "I brought presents for the kids," I told Mary, "but they'll have to wait until tonight. They're packed in my luggage." "We weren't expecting you until later," she said, surprised. "I got an early start," I explained. "Mike was whining about all the work, so I came to save the day." Mike punched me in the arm, prompting Sabrina to mimic him, much to Mary's disapproval. We left shortly afterward and headed to the new house. The place was a work in progress, but it was in good enough shape for me to begin wiring. Mike had ripped out most of the old sheetrock to install insulation, upgrade wiring, and replace anything that didn't look right. With my experience from the past year, I finished the wiring in just a couple of hours. Man, that was fast, Mike said, impressed. We did 300 houses this past year, I told him. I could do this in my sleep. He nodded and we moved on to other tasks. Mary called us for lunch, so we locked up the house, left my truck there, and drove back together. You look more comfortable on a job site than in a desk chair, Mike commented during the drive. Maybe, I said lightly, but it'll be nice to finally do something with my degree. As we drove, I took in the familiar sights, noticing how much the area had changed since I'd last been there. You also seem more relaxed than when you left, Mike noted. What's that about? That's a story for after the kids go to bed tonight, I said, smiling. Are you sure you'll be okay with them in the room with you? He asked. Yeah, I replied. I haven't seen them in ages. I want to be close to them. We had a nice lunch when we got back. Mary had prepared soup and sandwiches, carefully straining the kids' soup to avoid any choking hazards. The kids were generally well behaved, but Daddy's arrival had them bouncing off the walls, making it difficult for Mary to settle them down. Fortunately, their post-lunch nap gave her a much-needed break. Back at the house, Mike and I made significant progress. He looked both pleased and relieved, though there was a hint of something else. What's wrong? I asked late in the afternoon as we installed sheetrock in one of the bedrooms. I've been trying to get this done, he admitted. Paying for both the apartment and the house has been tight. I'll be glad when we can finally let the apartment go. Is Mary back at work yet? I asked. No, he said, his tone revealing more than his words. Something wrong? I asked awkwardly. He sighed. With everything going on, our sex life hasn't been what it used to be. It's starting to get old. Poor Muffin, I teased dryly. My last time was with Linda, and you know how long ago that was. He groaned. You knew Mary would take time to get her libido back after the kids, right? How do you know about her libido? He asked, narrowing his eyes. The internet, I replied with a smirk. Her body's still healing. She launched a pair of footballs out of her body. That's bound to leave some damage. Plus, you two are overwhelmed. Once you're settled in the house, I can babysit for a while. That should help you get some pants-off romance. That'd be nice, he admitted. So, you and Sabrina never? That night was supposed to be our first, I said quietly, continuing to work. Oh, he said, his voice softer. So you didn't get a little revenge? When Linda came to visit, there wasn't even a moment of temptation. I think Billy was frantic I'd try to take some kind of revenge through her, but there's nothing left between us, I said. Good call, Mike replied. Even if you hate his guts, doing that would make you just as guilty as he was. We got back to work, finishing the sheetrock in both kids' rooms before calling it a day. Back at the apartment, I snagged the bathroom first for a quick shower and then went out to pick up dinner while Mike got cleaned up. I grabbed barbecue, and the 5 of us sat down together. Mike and Mary each fed small bites to one of the kids, who grinned at me happily, clearly excited to have me back. After dinner, I handed out the presents I'd brought. A pair of stuffed cows from a restaurant in Austin famous for their beef. The kids were delighted, but bedtime came quickly. Once they were tucked in, the adults settled in with some drinks to talk. Mary nursed a glass of wine, I had a beer, and Mike mixed himself a rum and coke, offering me one. No thanks, I said. Since when? He asked, snorting in disbelief. I shrugged. Remember when Linda came to visit? Yeah, he said, sitting back down with his drink. I was glad to see Mary curl up beside him. It eased my worries about their relationship after what he'd said earlier. Well, I began. I told you I had some news but didn't want to talk about it over the phone. Yeah, I remember. You were pretty cryptic about it, Mike said. I nodded. Sabrina visited me. Mary's eyes lit with curiosity. What did she say this time? Some of the same things as before, I admitted. She called me out for not really making an effort to move on. She also told me to let go of Linda and Billy. It's been 6 years. If they've stayed together this long, they must really be in love. Mary nodded thoughtfully. That's not terrible advice. But that's only part of why you're angry at them. I nodded again. She also said something about that night. Sabrina reminded me that if she'd checked the intersection, we could have avoided the accident. She admitted she was distracted. She was in love, focused on me, and in a rush to get home. Mary tilted her head. Does that mean you're ready to forgive Billy? I don't know, I said honestly. She pointed out that if it had been you two in the truck instead of Billy and Linda, I'd have forgiven it by now. She said I could have forgiven anyone in the world except Billy. That's a lot to think about, Mary said. Mike chimed in. So where does that leave them? I talk to Linda from time to time, I said. I don't feel the same rage when I think about Billy either. I don't know if that's the start of forgiveness or the end result, but it's a big step. Mary nodded. But what does that have to do with you not drinking? I told them about Sabrina taking the tequila bottle in my dream and how it vanished afterward. I searched the apartment for a solid month and never found it, I said. The place was locked from the inside. No one else was there. Spooky, Mike said, shaking his head. So, no more heart stuff, huh? Yep, I confirmed. She asked me to stop, so I did. Mary looked at me with sympathy. Were you drinking a lot? Not really, I said. Once or twice a month. I drink with memories. She nodded. That's still troubling. Drinking alone is never a good sign. I guess she thought so too. I agreed. We stayed up talking for a while longer before I called it a night. I offered to handle the kids overnight so Mike and Mary could get some rest. The kids woke me up a few times, but I didn't mind. I changed diapers, soothed nightmares, and sang softly to calm them back to sleep. In the morning, I handed the kids over to Mary so I could head to the house. With Mike at work, I focused on finishing the sheetrock in the other 3 bedrooms and started work on other parts of the house. Mike had walked me through his plans earlier, and we were definitely playing catch-up. I lost myself in the work and didn't realize how late it had gotten until my phone rang. You coming home for lunch? Mary asked. I glanced at the time and realized I should have brought something to eat. Yeah, I lost track of time, but I'll be there soon, I promised. When I got back to the apartment, Mary set a plate of leftover barbecue in front of me before sitting down. Thanks, Mary, I said. I know you're busy with the kids. I really appreciate you making sure I eat. She smiled. The kids are a handful, but I can still make meals between keeping them from discovering fire on their own. Here's the rephrased version of your story. I chuckled at Mary's comment and asked, how are things going? I'd heard Mike's side, but I assumed Mary had her own concerns too. We're doing okay, she admitted. Mike's stressed about money, but with you here, we'll be able to get the house together, and that'll help. I nodded. I'll help with the bills just like before. I don't intend to let you two carry everything on your own. Well, she hesitated. We could use a little extra help with groceries. That troubled me. If they were cutting corners on food, the situation was worse than I'd thought. How bad is it, Mary? I asked quietly. It'll be fine once I can get back to work, she said, trying to sound optimistic. But right now we can't afford daycare. And without that I can't go back to work. Once we're in the house, it should get easier. But that's at least another month away. Maybe not, I said lightly. If you can manage the kids for another couple of weeks, Mike and I can make a big dent in the work. Starting tomorrow, I'll put in extra hours in the evenings. But tonight, once Mike gets home, you and I are going grocery shopping on my dime. She nodded reluctantly. The past few months have been pretty rough. Why didn't you tell me? I blurted. I've been sitting on money that could have helped you get the house in order. We're family, Mary. When I needed someone, you and Mike were there for me. You had to know I'd want to be here for you. She looked ashamed but nodded. I know. I wanted to, but Mike thought we needed to stay strong for you. He worries about you, Pete. He didn't want you thinking things were worse than they are. I nodded, thinking through the situation. What do we need? What do you mean? She asked, confused. I mean, what do we need to do? We need to get the kids into daycare. Are there bills to catch up on? A few, she admitted, but nothing alarming. Then tomorrow we'll enroll the kids so you can get back to work, I told her. It has to be hard not having any time to yourself. She looked at me, her eyes unsure. You'd really do that for us? Mary, I said firmly. You guys are my family. When Sabrina died, you took me in. You brought me here when you moved and you didn't have to. If I can toss in some money to help get your home set up, I'm happy to do it. I'll bring my checkbook and we'll enroll the kids tomorrow. Tonight we'll get everything you need for groceries. Okay, she said softly. I hugged her and the kids after lunch and headed back to work. I was still busy when Mike dropped by on his way home. Looks good, he said, glancing around. I think we'll be able to move in by the end of the month. That seems a little ambitious, I said, surveying the work still left to do. I'll do what I can to get it done, I added. We'll manage, he said confidently. Let's eat first, and then we'll come back and tackle more. Not tonight, I said. I promised Mary I'd take her grocery shopping. He didn't look thrilled but nodded. She knows what we need. Also, tomorrow we're enrolling the kids in daycare, I added. Once Mary's back to work, I'll handle things here during the day. We can't afford daycare until after we move in, he said, sounding irritated. I know, I said calmly. I'm paying for it. Pete, that's too much, he argued. Mike, I said firmly. This house is home for me too. It hurts that you didn't tell me things were tight. I could have helped. If you want to pay me back later, fine, but I want to do this. You brought me here when you didn't have to, and I was grateful for it. Now it's my turn to pay it forward. Spend tonight with your kids while I take care of the kitchen. Tomorrow we'll get things moving. Mike nodded, pulling me into a hug. Thanks, he said softly. It's been eating at me, you know? Yeah, I said. I could hear it in your voice yesterday. Mary's been under the same stress. Once she's back at work and the money's coming in, things will get better for both of you. He nodded, looking relieved. Later, after a simple dinner of mashed potatoes and sausages, Mary and I went out for groceries. She pushed one cart, and I pushed another as we filled them with what they needed for the week. I'm starting back to work on Monday, she told me as we shopped. Good, I said with a smile. That'll take some pressure off you both. This afternoon, I called the clinic, and they were thrilled to hear from me. They mentioned another hygienist would be out for surgery by the end of the month, making my timing perfect. If we had waited until we moved out of the apartment, I might have missed this opportunity or had to search elsewhere for work. I'm glad I could help, I told Mary sincerely. We stocked up on essentials during our Walmart trip, spending an eye-watering amount. By the time we unloaded the groceries at home, Mike was shaking his head at the sheer quantity. Still, it felt good to give back to them after everything they had done for me. I couldn't help but feel frustrated that Mike hadn't been upfront about their financial struggles sooner, but I decided to let it go. We were past that now, and focusing on solutions felt much better than dwelling on what hadn't been said. The next morning, enrolling the kids in daycare took less than an hour, and the staff welcomed them immediately. Though the kids fussed at first, they quickly began playing with others and mostly forgot about us. Mary gave me a big hug and a kiss on the cheek, thanking me for helping. When we returned home, we changed into work clothes and headed to the house. Mary helped as much as she could, sweeping up while I tackled the heavier tasks. She hadn't seen the house since renovations began, and she was amazed at the progress. I focused on spackling the kids' rooms, ensuring everything would be ready to sand by the weekend. Mike and I still needed to finish installing the sheetrock on the ceilings in the other rooms, but I felt confident we could start painting by next week. For the first time, the project seemed within reach. We shared a pleasant lunch before getting back to work. By the end of the day, the kids' rooms were prepped for sanding, and Mary and I managed to tackle smaller tasks around the house together. Later, we picked up the kids and returned home, where Mike joined me in the evening to tackle tasks Mary couldn't help with. This became the rhythm for the rest of the month. I worked on the house day and night, with Mike joining me in the evenings while Mary picked up the kids. I made sure to get home in time to cook dinner, easing some of Mary's load. On weekends, Mike and I worked all day. By the end of the month, the house was ready enough to move into. Some parts, like my room, still needed work. It was spackled and sanded but left unpainted to prioritize the rest of the house. The basement, which Mike hoped to turn into a game room and bar, remained untouched. These were projects we decided to tackle over time. Moving into the house was a huge relief for Mike and Mary, alleviating much of their financial stress. With the major work behind us, I started focusing on my own goals. During the day, I searched for a local job while keeping my promise to Sabrina to commit to success. I got a few nibbles from potential employers, but none led to anything substantial. Most were looking for candidates with more experience in the field. I had a year of experience installing and operating high-tech home automation systems, but it was clear the job market had become a frustrating game. Employers wanted top-tier talent while offering salaries far below what the work was worth. Still, I pressed on. Sabrina's words stayed with me. Perseverance, not just trying, was the key to moving forward.
Goodbye.